Story 1. The Whispering Wind. Jason had always found solace in nature. After a messy breakup and the stress of his job at an ad agency, he decided to escape to the wilderness for a solo camping trip. His destination, a remote stretch of forest in the Appalachian Mountains, far away from the city lights. It was the kind of place where cell phone signals faded into oblivion, and the only noise came from the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of wildlife. He hiked deep into the woods, setting up camp by a small, peaceful stream. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue across the trees. Jason felt a sense of calm, the kind he hadn't felt in months. As darkness began to fall, he lit a campfire, its crackling warmth a comfort in the growing chill. After eating a simple meal, Jason leaned back against a log, staring up at the stars that peeked through the canopy. The woods were so quiet, it was almost eerie. He hadn't seen another soul in hours, and that was exactly what he wanted, or so he thought. Around midnight, the wind picked up. At first, it was just a gentle breeze, swaying the branches overhead, but soon, the wind began to carry something else, a whisper. Jason sat up, his body instantly tensed. He strained his ears, trying to make sense of the sound, but it was indistinct, like distant voices carried on the wind. "Is anyone there?" he called out, feeling foolish. His voice echoed briefly before being swallowed by the night. There was no reply. He told himself it was just the wind, the way it moved through the trees. Still, the whispering continued. It grew louder, closer, as if someone, or something, was circling his campsite, just out of view. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the darkness, but the beam only revealed the dense underbrush and towering trees. The whispering seemed to move with the wind, growing more persistent, more unnerving. It was as if the very air around him was alive, carrying words he couldn't quite make out. He threw more wood onto the fire, hoping the light would ward off whatever was out there. But then, the wind stopped, and so did the whispering. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he stood by the fire, gripping a hunting knife he always brought for safety. The silence was deafening now, oppressive. He felt watched, hunted, though he saw no one. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. It was dark and indistinct, almost blending in with the shadows. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he stared, unblinking, at the figure. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, watching him. The firelight flickered, casting eerie shadows, and when Jason blinked, the figure was gone. The rest of the night, he didn't sleep. He stayed by the fire, knife in hand, his ears straining for any sign of the whispering wind. When dawn finally broke, Jason packed up and hiked out of the woods as fast as he could. To this day, he doesn't know what he saw that night, or what was whispering his name on the wind. Story 2. The Hollowed Tree. Lauren was no stranger to camping. She grew up in the Pacific Northwest, where the vast forests were her playground. After years of camping with friends and family, she wanted to try something new, solo camping. She picked a spot near Mount Hood, a secluded area she had visited before, but this time she would be alone. The day was perfect. Clear skies, fresh mountain air, and a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in a long time. She set up camp near a massive old tree, its trunk hollowed out by age or perhaps some long-forgotten fire. There was something almost majestic about the tree, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like ancient arms. As night fell, Lauren sat by her fire listening to the sounds of the forest. The occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant babbling of a stream. She felt at peace despite the eerie isolation. Around midnight, she decided to turn in. She doused the fire, crawled into her tent, and zipped up her sleeping bag. Sleep came easily, but it didn't last long. At some point during the night, a noise woke her. It was faint at first, like someone or something was moving around her campsite. She lay still, straining her ears, trying to convince herself it was just a deer or some other animal. But then she heard it again, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, circling her tent. Her heart raced as she lay there, paralyzed with fear. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low creaking sound came from outside her tent, like wood bending under pressure. The tree. Lauren's mind raced. Was something climbing the tree? She listened intently, trying to make sense of the sound. Suddenly, there was a loud thud, like something had fallen from the tree, or jumped down from it. Her breath caught in her throat as the footsteps resumed, this time moving toward her tent. She couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her flashlight and unzipped the tent, shining the light into the darkness. There was nothing there. The campsite was empty, the massive tree standing silently in the firelight's glow. But the air felt different, heavy, as if something had been watching her. The next morning, she decided to explore the tree, curious about the noises she'd heard. When she looked inside the hollowed trunk, her blood ran cold. Deep scratch marks covered the inside, as if something had been living or trapped inside the tree. And on the ground around the base of the trunk, she found fresh dirt disturbed, like something had crawled out. Lauren didn't stay another night. She packed up and left, the unsettling feeling following her all the way home. She never returned to that campsite, and she never camped alone again. Story 3. The Lantern in the Fog. For years, Daniel had been drawn to the rugged beauty of Maine's wilderness. The fog that rolled in from the Atlantic gave the forests an otherworldly atmosphere, and he loved the isolation. One fall, he decided to camp on the edge of a remote lake, hoping for a peaceful weekend alone. The first night was uneventful. He fished, cooked his catch over a fire, and enjoyed the tranquility of the lake. But the second night, as a thick fog descended over the forest, Daniel's peaceful retreat turned into something far more sinister. The fog was so dense that he could barely see the lake from his tent. The world outside became a shapeless white void. He sat by his campfire, feeling the dampness in the air, when he noticed a light in the distance. It flickered like a lantern moving slowly through the fog. Curious, Daniel stood up and watched as the light grew closer. He assumed it was another camper, perhaps someone lost in the fog. But as the light neared his camp, he realized something was wrong. There were no footsteps, no sound at all except for the crackling of his fire. "Hello?" he called out. "Do you need help?" The light stopped, hovering just at the edge of the fog. Daniel's skin prickled with unease. He took a step toward it, but as he did, the light flickered and vanished, swallowed by the fog. Disturbed, he returned to his fire, trying to shake off the strange encounter. But an hour later, the light returned, this time on the other side of his camp. It moved in the same eerie, soundless way, flickering like an old lantern. Daniel's heart pounded. He felt trapped, surrounded by the fog and the mysterious light that seemed to be toying with him. He decided he couldn't stay another night. He quickly packed his gear, extinguished the fire, and started hiking toward his car, using his flashlight to cut through the fog. As he walked, he glanced behind him and froze. The lantern light was following him. It stayed just far enough away to keep him on edge, moving silently through the trees, always flickering, always watching. He quickened his pace, but no matter how fast he walked, the light followed. By the time Daniel reached his car, he was shaking. He threw his gear into the back seat and drove off, glancing in his rearview mirror. The last thing he saw before the fog swallowed the road behind him was the lantern light, standing at the edge of the forest, flickering in the distance. He never figured out what it was, but the memory of that silent light still haunts him, even in his dreams.